So very warm welcome for those of you joining us, joining our Rotary eClub. My name's Simon Kitchen. I'm the president of the Rotary eClub and also CEO of Bipolar UK. It's been a great honour for me to work with Nicky for a number of years now, to be able to raise awareness of bipolar and the incredible achievements of people living with the condition, and obviously those around them, that their friends and their family that have shared their lives with them, of which is a great honour to have Ed Bicknell with us today. So a very warm welcome to this Rotary Bipolar eClub. We're going to be exploring bipolar and friendship with two industry greats, hit songwriter Nicky Chinn, definitely not a singer, not a singer-songwriter, and former music manager of Dire Straits, Ed Bicknell, and Ed's managed a number of other people as well. Both of them have had incredible lives, so I'm going to let them do the talking. I'm just going to do a quick bit of housekeeping. The Bipolar Rotary Club is open to anyone affected by and with an interest in bipolar. And you can join our online Rotary eClub drop-in session to find out more. If you enjoy this webinar, would like to come to more, then do email us on rotary@bipolaruk.org, and we'll have a little drop-in session with some of the members who are very, very friendly, and they'll be able to talk about what we do. And also, just a few housekeeping notes. Although you can't turn on your microphones or video, the chat on this is open if you'd like to join the conversation. However, when using the chat, please be aware that don't share anything that might identify someone else, obviously. So any personal stories, just keep it as anonymous as possible. There'll also be a Q&A at the end, so I'm going to come down I'm going to be coming in at exactly 1:45 with some Q&A, so put those into the chat and then we'll try and get through as many questions as possible. This webinar will be recorded as well and will be uploaded afterwards, so just be aware that if you do post anything in the chat, and if you do need any urgent support as well while this is going on, please do visit the Bipolar UK website, and it has got support and advice for those on crisis as well. I'm now going to hand over to Nicky. Has Ed joined us? Ed, are you there?
Yeah.
Brilliant, Ed.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Fantastic. I'm now going to take myself off the camera and basically hand over to the two of you and then rejoin at 1:45. So very warm welcome, Ed. And Nicky, take it away.
Okay, Ed, why don't I give you the honour of starting?
I don't want to start, Nicky. I want you to start.
Okay.
Let's just, well, actually, briefly, let's just tell our viewers, and welcome to all of them, how you and I first met. Nice big smile appears.
Yes, yeah. Well, how we almost met, in fact.
Yeah.
So why don't I tell you this? You tell the story.
Well, this is some years ago. I can't even remember how long. Probably at least 15 years, would you say? Yeah. And I was walking up Sloane Street, as one does, and I saw in front of me a gentleman who, for the first time in years, was wearing a suit with wine-coloured flared trousers, and also appeared to be using Brill cream, which was a forgotten product. And I thought to myself, my God, that's Nicky Chinn, the worst songwriter Britain's ever produced. And actually, this was going to sound strange to the people watching this, but I was actually too nervous to come up to you. I've always been a bit, I think if you're going to work in music or the creative arts, it helps to be a bit of a groupie. And I was a bit of a groupie, and so we didn't meet. I followed you up the street, and then you turned into the Roberto Cavalli shop, which was far too expensive for me to go into. And we met, I think, at an ASCAP. That's what in our business we call a collection society.
Roger Greenaway.
Yes, another famed songwriter who wrote, amongst other things, I'd like to teach the world to sing, and was completely ignored. Roger Greenaway, he sat us next to each other, I think, at one of those luncheons.
Yeah.
And we became firm friends.
We did indeed. I remember, again, this is going back a number of years. One night we had a phone call for about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And that really started to cement the friendship. And then we just kept on seeing each other
Yeah,
for dinner, our very long dinners that normally last about 4 hours, and we close the restaurant.
we do.
We talk about many, many things. And of
Yeah.
course, one of the things that came up was my bipolar condition. And you took a fair amount of interest in that. And had you met anybody? Had you met anybody before that you knew had bipolar?
Yes, although I didn't realize it at the time. When I first got into management, my first career in music was as a failed drummer. And then I became an agent for 6 or 7 years back in the 70s. And in I think it was in 1978, yeah, Jerry Rafferty was having a huge worldwide hit with a song called Baker Street. And through a whole set of rather strange circumstances, I ended up being his manager, which meant that my first management job, within 6 weeks of doing it, I had a #1 album and single in America. And unfortunately, it was a very, very difficult relationship. It went on for probably about 5 years, and then he and I parted company. In fact, I dropped him because it was becoming so difficult. He was so abusive to me. And a couple of years later, he called me up, and I suppose it was rather the devil you know kind of thing, asked me if I'd take him on again. And against all my better instincts, I agreed. And it didn't last a year. It was just the same. And unfortunately, it was exacerbated by alcohol. He was an alcoholic. And I only learned very recently, probably within the last 2-3 months, I was reading I was doing some writing for a book, and I was reading some backstory interviews with Jerry, and one in particular with his daughter, Martha, where she mentioned that he was bipolar. And of course, immediately a load of bells rang.
Mm-hmm.
And it explained to me a lot of the way that he behaved towards me, his musicians, record producer, and the whole, team that you put together back then. And it was a very, in some ways, it was a very positive experience because it opened a lot of doors for me, particularly with Dire Straits. I made no money. I know people hear this trotted out, and I took a lot of abuse for
Well,
it.
the interesting thing is, I mean, back then it would have been called manic depression.
Yeah,
yeah. And the interesting thing is, and I said this to you the other day, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
The bipolar and then the drink, or the drink and then the bipolar? It is my experience that a lot of people with bipolar drink too much because it helps deal with the pain.
I'm not qualified to say. I mean, in his case,
the reason I'm bringing it up isn't actually necessarily for you to give me an answer, but just to put it out there. There are a lot of people watching and listening, and it is a worthwhile point to make. But a lot of people with bipolar do drink too much, and one of the reasons is it helps deal with the pain. It's a great numbing element. And you'll never know which came first. I mean, I can remember going back a long way now. I used to drink far too much, and looking back, maybe that helped deal with a lot of the issues. And the only time you can really sort these issues out is when you're sober. And that's really what happened to me. I started to sort things out when I stopped drinking, went into therapy, etc., etc. But because I remember, really, it was us getting together and having these dinners that originally got you interested in bipolar, which you certainly did.
Yeah, I mentioned Rafferty. I actually had a kind of semi-experience with the late Ronnie Scott. I didn't know Ronnie Scott, but I, for many, many years, was one of two altruistic supporters who would lend them money or get them a new piano or something. The other one being Chris Blackwell. And Ronnie was bipolar. And eventually, sadly, it led to his suicide. His addiction, his other addiction, if you like, was gambling. It wasn't drinking per se.
Yeah, another distraction.
But another distraction.
Interestingly enough, I don't know if you know, but the percentage of suicide in bipolar and compared to the other mental illnesses is actually higher. The chances of suicide in bipolar are relatively high, which is another tragedy of the condition. So you say Ronnie committed suicide. Yeah, that unfortunately that is part of what can happen with this condition. It is, as you know from our conversations, it is a very difficult condition to deal with.
One of the things. Oh, sorry. Go on. Go on.
No, when you first heard me say to you, "I'm bipolar," what did you think? What was your immediate reaction? You know, you've got somebody sitting there saying, "Hey, I've got a mental illness. I've got bipolar."
I was wondering whether you were paying the bill that night.
If I'm hypomanic, I certainly
would. I didn't really have a reaction in the kind of way that you might be implying, because I like to think of myself as a very open thinking person, and I don't have any of the isms. I'm not ageist. I'm not this. I'm not that. And I just thought, well, it did make me jump slightly because of my experience with Jerry, but that had been in a professional context, and we were not dealing with each other professionally. I think what struck me was how normal you are. Now, I know that because that conversation has gone on many times over many, many evenings, but I know that that is a consequence of the therapy that you've put yourself through, if that's the right expression.
Yeah, and the medication. Yeah.
But you didn't fit the cliched perception of what manic depression, because I come from the generation when it was manic depression.
Indeed.
And so my only other I wouldn't call it an experience, but after Ronnie Scott died, his daughter Rebecca wrote a book called A Fine Kind of Madness, which was about her father and about his condition. And I had read that in the context of being a jazz fan and being a friend to the club. And I probably hadn't taken it on in the personal sense, because you were the first, other than Rafferty. And in Rafferty's case, I didn't know that was his issue. And it would have made no difference if I had. I mean, would have known what to do. So you were the first sort of living, breathing persona who was not only bipolar, but was telling me that you were.
Yes.
Because it's not something that I mean, I've worked with a lot of people who I suspect now, based on my meager knowledge, should probably go and get diagnosed.
Yes.
One of the things I was going to ask you was whether you think there's any correlation between living with bipolar and being in the creative arts, or specifically music.
Yes. Well, yes and no. Yes, definitely, actually, is the answer. The no is that not everybody with bipolar has the good fortune to have that creative side. So I know a number of people with bipolar who are very creative and, in fact, use that certain hypermanic area, which is that middle area between depression and too high. It's this euphoric, very creative area that unfortunately never lasts too long. I wish it did. If I could bottle it, I would have done.
Well, just stop. No, just stop there for a second, because this is fascinating to me. And I've asked you this before privately, so I'll ask you here. If you listen if you're forced to listen, sorry, to your songs, because nobody would do it voluntarily. If you were listening to your material of, say, let's say the 70s, that run that you had with Mike, with Susie Quattro and Smokey and Sweet and Mud and so on, with only one exception, which is Lonely This Christmas, that I can think of, they're all very upbeat, very jolly, very happy songs and lyrics, and have a sing-along quality to them in the choruses. And I remember asking you once whether you wrote, at what point in this kind of cycle that you're talking about were you writing those? Because presumably you were writing them in the sort of semi-manic state, as opposed
no, not at all. When I'm depressed, I literally can't write my name. So songs are absolutely out. When I'm depressed, I can forget it. I lock myself away and that's it. When I'm hypermanic, the thing I just described, I'm creative, I'm up, I'm happy, I'm euphoric. But I had lunch about 3 years ago with a professor from Oxford who specializes in bipolar. And I said to him, how come I write so well when I'm well? I'm writing hits when I'm well, instead of the hypermanic area. And he said, I'll tell you why. He said, in my opinion, you have a very, very slight hypermanic strain running through your brain at all times. Not enough to make you unwell, but enough to make you creative. And I said, I had never thought of it that way, obviously, because that's a medical explanation. I said, but you have just given me an answer I've been searching for years and years and years. I didn't know why I wrote well when I was well. And that is the reason. When I'm hypermanic, I get maybe a little bit extra creative, a little bit happier, but that is what allows me to write when I'm euthymic, as they say, which is well. So I'm still getting a very slight advantage from my bipolar. But a point I will emphasize that I made a couple of minutes ago, not everybody with bipolar has that creative streak. It's not a given. I'm bipolar, I'm creative. It's not a given at all. But sometimes it is the case, and we're able to take advantage of it.
Okay, let me put you on the spot. Do bipolar people know that they're bipolar?
Oh, no, not necessarily by any means. For starters, there is officially, statistically, it takes a lot of people 10 years to be diagnosed. 10 years from the symptoms, and people are told 10 years later, you've got bipolar by a psychiatrist or a doctor or whatever. So lots of people have bipolar and don't know it. So they wonder why they're unwell. They wonder why they're, getting depressed and getting elevated, and they don't know. And that's a huge disadvantage. I mean, I was diagnosed when I was 16, which was very, very, very rare back then. But at 16, I had a label. I knew what was wrong with me. I didn't know a lot about it because there weren't a lot of books in the library on manic depression. So all I knew about it was what my psychiatrist told me. It was something I had to learn about. I was ashamed of it at the time also. Something I haven't been for many, many, many years. As you know, I talk about it incredibly openly. But at 16, it's something to very easily be ashamed of. But lots
Can I
of
just
people...
interrupt you, Nicky? Sorry, let me just stop you there.
Yeah.
16. Are you talking about ashamed because of the way that society viewed mental illness then? Yes. Because you're talking about several hundred years ago, or are you talking, when you say shame, or was that kind of a consequence of your parentage or the group, societal group you were in?
Totally. My parents were ashamed. They didn't want mental illness on their doorstep.
Right.
That's not a great criticism of my parents, because many people were like that. They did not want mental illness on their doorstep. So I felt ashamed of it by the reaction at home. My friends actually, I didn't really understand it, but they certainly didn't give me any reason to feel ashamed of it. It really was at home. Plus, there was a lot of stigma out there back then in the early 60s. There's still stigma, by the way, just not as much as then. Back then, the word mental illness was almost a dirty word. And so, yeah, I felt shame. But I learned not to. I learned to accept that it was a part of me. It was who I am. And you know, and then as time went on, actually, I did get some of the creative advantages, but I just found at a fairly early age that it was okay to be who I am, and if other people didn't like it, well, tough.
When you became successful, and I make jokes about this all the time, but you were very successful. Did people in the music business, I'm talking really in a period, I suppose, from about 1973 on, did you get any kind of reaction from, or what did you sort of not go out and about when you were having a depressive episode?
When I was depressed, I locked myself away.
You did?
Right. I mean, you know, on occasions I was in hospital, by the way. Let's not ignore that. At 16, I was in hospital. But if I wasn't in hospital, I could lock myself away for 6 weeks. But one of the things I have always found in the music business, and it's been very fortunate for anybody with mental illness in the music business, the music business is very broad-minded about mental illness. I have not run into stigma once in the music business. I mean, I remember, as you know, one of my closest friends was Mickey Most. He couldn't have been more supportive. He couldn't have been more supportive. He'd visit me in hospital when I was at home.
So he knew about this.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Quite a lot of people knew, because by that stage the shame had gone, and this was me saying, "Hey, this is who I am." You know, and if you have a problem with it, well, then you have a problem with it, and that makes you very narrow-minded. But the music business has always been very, very cool about mental illness. I mean, I have literally been riding with somebody in Nashville and said to them, "Oh, you know, I have bipolar," and the answer was, "So have I." So, you know, and let's face it, as we know, it's not just bipolar or depression. There's a lot of addiction in the music business. Nobody is stigmatized for that. It's there, and it's accepted. There's a lot of support. I've always found people I know in the music business very supportive of my bipolar condition. It's the right business to be in if you've got a mental illness. That is not the case for every. Well, yeah, and I say that with empathy to people who are not in the music business, because people encounter a lot of problems with bipolar in the workplace.
Of course. Yeah. Actually, just leading on from that, let me ask you a hypothetical question, which wasn't hypothetical to me, as I've explained. I was representing somebody who was displaying some very erratic and quite vocally abusive language, you know, to me.
Mm.
And at the same time, this person was very, very successful commercially.
Yeah.
I wasn't benefiting from that financially for various reasons, but I was benefiting from it in terms of, as I used the expression earlier, opening doors for me.
Yes.
At a time when I was still quite a small player in the game, and Dire Straits hadn't become what they became. If that was now, in the present time, how would I go about identifying, as a layman, that person's condition, and how does one go about getting them to get diagnosed if they are not receptive to that?
Well, it's very unlikely you would work out they were bipolar.
Right.
Because, I mean, you might now, because you've
Yeah.
got knowledge about it. But if we go back then, it's very unlikely you'd work out they were bipolar. And what would probably strike you is the drinking side of it. Because on the basis that a lot of people with bipolar, they don't work out they've got bipolar, you would have been very unlikely to. It is worth mentioning, by the way, that bipolar, like a lot of mental illnesses, can carry its own anger. It is by no means unheard of for depression to have some very underlying anger with it. And it sounds like Rafferty carried a lot of anger. I mean, there's obviously no question.
Yeah.
Why is another matter? You might know that, you might not, but he obviously, probably from an early age, early upbringing, and everything, carried a lot of anger. For you to work out somebody is bipolar would be very, very hard unless you saw them depressed, and then 3 months later they were flying. You know, high, out of control, shopping, spending a lot of money, doing all kinds of things. And then you say, you might, because you know now through me, you know, I said, you know what? I reckon he's bipolar. But it's not easy to diagnose.
So if I was working with somebody who suddenly went into a car showroom
Yes.
and bought 2 Rolls Royces and
Yes.
already had one,
Yes.
who am I thinking of, Nicky?
Me. Yeah, one. Yeah.
Because one of the things you told me was that spending is one of, it's not, but it's a what's the word? A symptom almost of.
No, it's all of hypomania. For most people, it is a massive symptom. It becomes compulsive. It's an obsession. Got to spend money. And that particular day, when I was very hypomanic, yeah, I had a Rolls, and I went in to Jack Barclay in Berkeley Square, and I bought 2 more. And I mean, I can't say I was of sane mind because I was very hypomanic, and I've got to spend money. And thank God, Mickey Most, who I mentioned a few minutes ago, he also bought his Rolls at Jack Barclay, and he heard about this, and he went in and he said, "You cancel those." I'm a very good friend of Nicky's, and I'm telling you, he's not 100% of them. He won't want them. When he, gets well, he won't want them. He was right, of course. I wouldn't have wanted them. And that is the problem with it. It's this desire to spend money. I mean, I would go into a shop, and if there was a shirt in one color I liked, and they had 17 other colors, I'd buy them all. It has ruined some people. They spend so much. I mean, I never got to that level, fortunately. It has ruined people. Out of control, spend, spend, spend. I had a friend in the 70s. You probably remember the airline Pan Am. He tried to buy the Pan Am building in London. these are the kind of things that hypomania can do, and it can ruin people.
Didn't you have an episode involving watches?
Yeah, actually, this wasn't that long ago. This was last year when I got a little hypomanic, and I bought 5 watches in a week.
I need a watch for Christmas.
And fortunately, I realized I was a little high, and I'm in group therapy, as you know, and I took it to the group, and I took it to my psychiatrist, and I kind of slowed myself down, and it's the first time ever I've been hypomanic and did not get depressed. First time ever.
Because one of the interesting things about my friendship with you is I've never seen you in either of these states. I mean, I've seen you order everything off the menu and then call the waiter back and cancel half of it.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Which was about 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
But I've never seen you actually. I've never been aware that when we've been out or whatever, that you've been either down or up.
I have always been well since you and I have known each other. I have always been well. Maybe you've got something to do with that, Ed.
The check's in the post.
But I have always been well since we've known each other. An interesting thing to add about hypomania or mania, there is this saying, "What goes up must come down," and generally that is true. It is very, very difficult indeed to be hypomanic or manic and not come down. And my general way, if I'm up, I always come down. It is also worth saying that my predominant area of mood, if I'm unwell, is depression. So I might be hypomanic or high for a period of time, weeks. I can get depressed for months. So that's my default area if I am unwell. But no, you've never seen me unwell, which is great. I've been well for a long time now. Last time I was very ill was 10 years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How do you pull yourself out of that?
I can't pull myself out of it at all. I wish I could. It's a process. For me, when I become unwell, it's usually for subconscious reasons. I don't know why I'm unwell. I'm in therapy, as you know. 9 years ago, nearly 10 years ago, I became very depressed. I didn't know why. I was in therapy. I was talking one day to my therapist saying what a great 70th birthday I'd had in Nashville. And the minute I said it, it was a light bulb moment. I said, I know why I'm not well. I didn't like being 70. But by then it was too late. I was already unwell. The fact that I found the reason was too late. And I tell you, Ed, I was unwell, low, high, low, more low than high for a year and a half. And I didn't pull myself out of it. A lot of therapy, group therapy, medication, and bit by bit, I got well. I maintained, people may or may not agree with me, I maintain there is no such thing as a mental illness that lasts forever. I actually believe if I didn't take medication, I'd get well. It would just take a lot longer. There was no pulling myself out of it. There never will be. It's a process. It's time. It's therapy. It's medication. I believe therapy and medication together are essential. I don't believe in one without the other. I know I'm very lucky to be able to afford therapy. A lot of people can't, and they're not too strong on it on the NHS. So in that regard, I've been very fortunate. but it's a process, and it can take time. And that's what happened with me.
How important is it to you to have this circle? I know you have, because I know most of them, are very close friends. As part of to keep you balanced, as it were.
Enormously important. Because they, like you, I mean, they're also supportive. It's fully accepted that this is me, and everyone is so supportive, and would do anything they can to help, which is not always a lot, other than be there.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing of all. Be there, and my friends are there. I never ask anybody to understand, because I don't believe anybody who's never had it can understand. I think you have to, but all I ask is from my friends, accept it. And everybody does. And everybody is there for me. And that has been so, so important. And I've been lucky enough to have some great friends who are there for me and accept me for who I am. I don't get judged. And just, yeah.
Well, you've already got your song catalogue to be judged, so it's not necessary to have you as well. They are sufficiently so awful that there's no need.
No, well, so said the snobbish manager of Dire Straits. If you mix with Mark Knopfler for long enough,
yeah, well,
you're going to end up a musical snob, aren't you, Ed?
Yes. Actually, I must say, I went to see David Gilmour at the Albert Hall last night, and I would put it in one of the best 3 shows I've seen in my life ever.
Really? Well,
It
great
was
guitarist.
just unbelievable, and
great player.
It was if you were having a bipolar episode and you'd been there, it would have been your therapy for 2.5 hours. It was stunning.
Yeah.
And Mark Brickman, who did the lighting was mind-boggling. It was completely technology has come a long way in the area of lighting.
Yeah. Maybe he was a bit
When
high.
you when you talk about bipolar, do you know why you are bipolar? What the first?
Yes. It is a chemical imbalance that ostensibly you get born with, and I believe that chemical imbalance ultimately needs triggers, psychological and emotional triggers. In my case, in my upbringing, I had to deal with rejection and abandonment, is the way I put it. Not everybody would react to it the way I did. In those days, people were sent to boarding school early. I went at 6.
I can't get my head around that at all.
I know. And I think it had a lot to do with my bipolar condition. I think it triggered the chemical imbalance. And that is where I think therapy came in, because it allowed me to get in touch with those triggers from my upbringing. I always remember it was the late 80s and I was very unwell. And I went to see a psychiatrist at the Nightingale Hospital. And he admitted me that night. I was so unwell. And he said, while you're here, you'll do some therapy and group therapy. And I said to him, I don't need therapy. I've got a chemical imbalance. He said, no, you might find it useful. Well, of course, I became a devotee, as you know. It starts, I think, with this chemical imbalance that needs to be triggered. In my case, it was triggered by my upbringing, and the rest is history. And I didn't go into therapy till I was 48.
Sorry, till you were 48?
Years old, yeah.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. And that was the beginning of getting well. Absolutely the beginning. I suddenly started to find things out I'd probably been in denial of for years and years and years. It was very painful. Um, there is an old saying, it's a cliche, no pain, no gain. But actually, it's true. Um, the truth hurts, but the truth heals. And that's for me what therapy's all about.
You seem a very, as long as I've known you, a very positive person.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been through some bumps in your life over the last
Yes.
couple of years, but generally you're very up and very positive. And I never ever think of when I'm going to see you that it never crosses my mind that you're bipolar or you've lived with bipolar. That's just something that's almost kind of over here, and it's you've dealt with it so well that it doesn't, to an outsider, if you like, seem to figure in your life at all. I mean, this conversation that we're having, like every other one we've had about it, I've learned things about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's because Ed, it's because I'm very well at the moment. I'm very well indeed. Um, my life has been enriched actually by the work I'm doing with Bipolar UK,
Yeah.
by things like today and other things I've done. So I've got things to do. I feel useful. Um, I've got a hit record at the moment, as you know, which is
Yeah.
great. It's great for the self-esteem and everything. And ever since you've known me, I've been well. Um, and you don't have a lot of preconceptions about mental illness. You see,
Are you
when
talking
I
about
talk
me?
to you, yeah, when I
Yeah.
talk to you, you're not someone who judges, or so many people do, by the way. So many people do, but you don't. You're interested in it, so just as I'm interested in many of the things that you've done and everything. But we have a very natural, open conversation about it. And I never feel I'm going to be judged by you. It's the same with my friends. Not, very important because a lot of people with mental illness are judged negatively.
Oh, yeah.
And that makes them hide.
Mm.
And that's a great shame. People hide. They don't admit, they don't want to talk about it because they feel it's a risk. I don't look at it that way at all. For me, it's no risk. And it's like, well, if you don't like it, well, that's your problem. It's not mine.
One of the interesting things about some of the artists that I've worked with, and certainly many that I know or have known, uh, the ones that I've always had the most comfortable situation with, professionally or personally, and this is stating the obvious, they're the ones that have got a sense of humor about
Yes,
them, about themselves.
yes.
And you've got that in spades. I mean, you'd have to have, because you have written some real turkeys. So you'd have to have that. But being serious, all of the people that I have had the longest professional relationships with are the ones who have a sense of humor, and that has to be about themselves.
And
Because if you're working in pop music, I know Simon's just come on, but if you're working in pop music, you can't take it that seriously.
and I know I have made you laugh with
Oh,
tears running down your face with
yeah,
some of my stories that at the time were not funny, believe me,
yeah,
but they are now.
yeah.
Yeah. And
Well, we've all got a few of those.
I know. Simon, hi.
I've been listening in intently. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing so many stories. We've still got another 15 minutes, so just thought I'd bring in some of the viewers, just so people who are listening in with some questions. So, you said a few times, Nicky, that Ed's been lucky that every time he's known you that you've been well. But Ed, did you ever worry about Nicky was unwell and that you'd have to get mental health services involved at all?
No, I mean, there've been a couple of occasions, because we are talking about quite a long period of time that he and I've been in love. I've had a couple of notes when he's cancelled something, saying I'm not feeling too good or something like that.
Yeah.
And because I have been educated by him, at least as far as Nicky's concerned, I can't speak for everybody else who's got this illness. I know what to do, and what to do in his case is nothing. He's got this very adequate support system. I have had situations with fans, funnily enough, of artists that I've worked with. When you get fan mail, 90% of fan mail wants an autograph or a photograph or how do I get a ticket? But there's a 10% which is some really seriously off the wall stuff. It can often be threatening. Anybody who's working in the area I'm in has had mountains of death threats, lots of highly sexualized mail coming from, interestingly enough, only from warm countries. I don't know what the correlation is there, but so you get used to people think that what managers do is records and publishing and shows and that. There's a lot more to it than that. And in the personal area, you do come in contact with a lot of people who are, by any stretch of your imagination, they really need to get themselves into some kind of treatment if they can. They become obsessed. All big artists have this problem. I think,
but I don't think you've ever had to worry about me, really, have you?
No. Coming back to the question, no. It actually, Simon, it's never, to be honest, it's never crossed my mind since I've known Nicky. I mean, I don't think, this is Nicky Chinn, he's living with bipolar. I just think this is Nicky Chinn, who wrote Can the Can when he was running about in a wheat field or something. I don't have any I don't think of him in that context. And I've dealt, and I don't think of artists I've worked with, like Jerry Rafferty I mentioned, or Ronnie Scott, or Dusty Springfield. I didn't work with her, but she was bipolar as well. I don't think of those people as bipolar. I think of them in the kind of artistic context of what they're producing, and do I get on with them? Do I like them as people, kind of thing? It's just a natural. It's not, because it's music. It doesn't make it special in any way to me. So no, the answer is, as far as Nicky goes, he's in my, he's in my phone book. That he's just another person in my phone book. He's under the CHs.
And Nicky, what's your number one that's out at the moment?
Well, it's not number one. It's a hit in about 25 countries. Big hit. Stumbling In, that was a big hit for Susie Quatro and Chris Norman, the lead singer of Smokey, in 1978, was a huge hit. An Australian DJ has made a dance version of it, and it is enormous, absolutely enormous. And they've just done a version of it in Spanish to go to all the Latin America. It's just a huge, huge record, but I didn't expect. And many, many months ago, a friend of mine, who also a friend of Ed's, actually, David Howe, rang me up and said, "Did you know you were number one in Germany?" And the answer was, "No, I did not." Just come out of nowhere. Now, great, absolutely great.
Oh, well, congratulations on that, Nicky. And you're going to go on another tour at all? Is that going to go in a... You could organise some sort of tour. That'd be awesome, wouldn't it?
No, I'm going to organise nothing. I'm going to enjoy it from home.
I know, Ed, you were talking earlier on about symptoms of bipolar, and for anyone who is watching this who's wondering about themselves or a loved one, there is a page we got called Could It Be Bipolar? We just got a little test for the mood disorder questionnaire. And that's quite a good way for people. It doesn't diagnose people, it's not a screening tool, but it does help people understand the symptoms. It's really looking for hypomanic symptoms, the ones that Nicky was describing. So if you've experienced those and you've had depression, then you should probably go and talk to a doctor about it. But as you said, bipolar is a lot more common than people realize. 1 in 50
It's interesting,
adults.
actually, when I sent out the invitations to this, to my kind of address book, if you like.
Yeah.
And this is the address book of address books. Let's admit it. And it was interesting how many people, quite a number of them are, you know, well-known names. People, anybody watching this would know who they are. Came back to me and said, well, there was one I got from a very well-known band leader who said, all of my band need to watch this. All of them are complete depressed. He used the manic depressive thing because it was a song by Jimi Hendrix back in the day, and it kind of worked its way into a lot of the consciousness of a lot of guitar players because of that song. But there were a lot of people who got back to me and said, "Oh, I'm going to watch this because I think da 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 da." But they never said it about themselves. It was always somebody else. Usually the drummer, because the drummers just have this banging in their heads all the time.
You could have a really great music night, couldn't you, or music sung by and written by people living with bipolar. I mean, it'd be quite an incredible night.
Yeah. And there are people, you know, who were perceived as being very depressed and so on. I have Leonard Cohen in mind. When I met Leonard Cohen on the several occasions when I did, he was one of the funniest, droll, dry humor, very witty, very bright. He didn't fill that perception, which, you know, in the music game, people's lyrics tend to direct people, the kind of listeners that they get. So, I mean, what Nicky was writing and is writing is what you might call, it's mainstream pop. And you'd be quite happy with that description. But you wouldn't apply mainstream pop to, say Bob Dylan, for instance. And now there's a man with a sense of humor.
But there's never been anything to suggest, to the best of my knowledge, that he has any mental illness. Am I right, Ed?
No, not so far as I know.
Sometimes depressed kind of lyrics don't necessarily mean you're
get that.
depressed. You know, there could be your view of the world.
I mean, Bruce Springsteen has, of course, talked about his depression.
Yes.
A huge amount. I mean, he's even done a one-man show about it. And that has certainly influenced some of his writing, for sure.
Brian May has talked about his depression.
Oh, has he? I didn't know that. I know
he has. Yeah.
Just going back, Ed, Bob Dylan, he was the chap who wrote the songs for the Byrds, wasn't he?
Well, he didn't write them for the Byrds, but the Byrds came along and yes,
Tambourine
they had
Man.
a hit with Mr. Tambourine Man, 8 Miles High. Was that one of his? No, but they had quite a number of hits from the Dylan catalog.
He didn't write them for; he wrote them for himself, and they
great band.
It's a joke. It's an attempt at a joke there, Ed. I'm sorry. So,
was a terrible joke. I did. Bob.
Talking about, just coming back, Nicky, to when you were talking about, there's a few questions here about medication.
Yeah.
And just about someone's asked, do you take medication, lithium, and what do you see as the benefits of medication? Obviously, there's lots of side effects to medication as well. So,
actually, interesting you mentioned that, because in 1993, I changed psychiatrists, and I went to a man who actually I would call the best psychiatrist I've ever been to. And after a few weeks of going over my history and whatever, he said, I believe lithium doesn't work for you. And I believe it never has. Apparently, that put me in a 5% bracket of what they call lithium non-responders. Well, 5% is pretty small. So if it works for 95%, that's pretty good. I take a combination now of lamotrigine and valproate, both anti-epileptics that have been found to work for bipolar, and they have kept me very well for a very long time. I think a lot of bipolar patients, by the way, they stop taking their medication very often because they want to get high. I do not recommend that. So for me, medication has been very, very useful. Obviously, when I'm ill, antidepressants are very useful. You know my attitude, Simon, and that is that medication and therapy need to go together. But as I did say earlier, I realize that's not available to everyone. But if you're on medication, for God's sake, take it. Lithium does have side effects, of course, because lithium can have side effects on the kidneys, as is a well-known fact.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, I mean, I know people who take lithium. It has been a lifesaver for them. But medication is essential in this condition.
Yeah, it's obviously I don't take medication. I don't live with bipolar, so I'm always there to listen to the experts, those taking the medication, and also the
And it's
prescribers.
just, if you've been prescribed medication, for God's sake, take it, because it can be a lifesaver.
Mm-hmm. And Nicky, I think probably get one more question in. Were you ever in denial about your bipolar at all? I know it's a diagnosis that people struggle to come to terms with. There's still a huge amount of stigma as well, a lot of fear around the
Yes.
condition.
Yes. I was never in denial. I had to leave school at 16 because of it. I accepted that I had an illness, that I had a condition, and I've never, ever, ever been in denial of it. Even at that very young age, I was able to say, this is what I've got. It was a relief to be given a name, because back then, if you were manic depressive, and certainly if you went a bit high, people said you're crazy. Well, I had this label, manic depression, which allowed me to say, you know what, I have a condition. There is something wrong with me. Whether you like that or not, I have this condition. So no, I was never in denial of it. And at a pretty early age, I was willing to talk about it and tell people. I've always accepted it's a part of me.
That's brilliant, Nicky. Well, you're a real inspiration for people, and I think just more and more stories. And it's been really good talking about the symptoms of bipolar, but actually just hearing about your life and your friendship is really so important, because there's more to people than their mental illness. And Ed, you talked about that really eloquently when you talked about all of the artists and how you judge them by their music and so forth. And
I don't. Yeah. I mean,
so
the thing about working with artists, if you don't, it's absolutely. It sounds so obvious. It's not the money in popular music or the popular arts. To me, is that's a side product of what you do. You've got to be able to get on with, be inspired by, and believe in the people you're working with. And that means not just their talent, it means their drive, their work ethic, how they are around people. I've had some big blow-ups with artists who were being rude to members of the public because they know 3 chords. That's just not on. But most
I don't want to know about Status Quo. That's for another call, I think.
That Status Quo are great blokes, let me say that.
I think about the 3 chords or something, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, actually, they know 4 chords, but
4 chords,
which is actually 2 more than Nicky knows. So
easily.
Yeah.
We've come up to 1 o'clock. It's sped by, hasn't it?
Yeah, I knew it would.
Back again. It's been fantastic, and there's
really
so many more.
This. Yeah,
many more anecdotes from the music industry.
And I must, by the way, I must
say, Simon, there's actually room for us to do another of these. We've only covered half of it, really, haven't we, Ed?
Yeah.
But I hope it's been fun and informative for everybody who's logged in, because that was the idea, wasn't it? To be informative, but be entertaining. I hope it's done that.
Yeah. And I
we've had
must,
over.
on behalf of both of us, Simon, I have to thank Lorna and Eleanor and Sarah for
yeah,
their help in
very much so.
putting this together.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
I know they're listening now,
absolutely
so
brilliant.
that's very grateful for that. So I'm sure they've done a fantastic job, haven't they?
Yeah,
Well,
They have indeed.
great. You've got a great organisation, I must say. And if there's
cheers.
anybody out there who knows me, who's watching this, and they're thinking, oh, maybe I should look into this, you know, that your website's instantly available and so on.
Absolutely.
I can think of several hundred who really need to check in.
Well, we can have a conversation about that. We'd love to meet them. We've had over 37 questions, so I'm not sure how it works
Great.
on Zoom, but there might be some that we can take offline and answer if possible, because obviously everyone, we weren't able to ask all of them. Thank you so much for everyone joining us.
Our pleasure.
Let's do it again. Let's meet again, maybe before Christmas or in the new year.
Yeah, anytime.
We're incredibly grateful for your time and love listening to it. And it's been a great conversation. And both you stay well, and hopefully see you both in person as well.
Thanks, Steve. Nicky, this is the bit where you go to the bottom right-hand corner and press leave.
Simon, it's been a great pleasure from my point of view, and hope everyone enjoyed it. And Ed, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Champion, as we say in the Northeast.
I'm getting loads of questions like, sorry?
I think we'll just press leave now, and then we'll put it on. We'll answer them offline, but we'll try and get back to everyone who's asked questions. But thank you so much, and we'll speak again soon.
That's the red oblong square, Nicky. The red oblong in the bottom right-hand corner. Bing.
All the best, Simon. Take care.